this is part 2 of a series I call Angel Verses, the weird ones, and my little cherubs here, because we have to explain what these guys really do. And of course everybody knows they don't look like this, we don't know what they look like, and they don't act like those people look, those painters had the cupids and the putti and the other little crazy creatures act. They don't act like this. But we'll just read the verse here, which is the central verse of the teaching. It'll take us a while to get to this one. Therefore, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. And we've got crazy things going on in this verse that it's going to take a little bit of background work to get into it. You can see this is the NASB, the New American Standard Bible, which, like King James, has the symbol of in italics, meaning it's not in the text. The word authority is a better translation than the King James, which has the word power here. It's the word exousia. And on her head, because of the angels, what on God's green earth does that mean? On a literal understanding of the divine counsel of God. And this is hugely important for this verse and for other verses in the Word. What do I mean by that? We'll see that in a minute. Psalm 82 describes it, but you'll be familiar with this in another way of thinking. A quick review of it: the divine counsel theology, as we would call it, and as actually the scholarly world calls it. There's a growing number of voices, of which I am part, that teaches as a central issue the divine counsel. Let's just read a verse that you're very familiar with. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The point in this that I'm pointing out is that there are other gods. And Psalm 82:1, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. And many of you, by way of review here, before we get into the 1 Corinthians mindset, know of Job 1 and 2, where the council is in session. You'll have seen other places in the Word, if you've read enough, where God is talking to angels next to him, saying, well, what do you think we ought to do here, guys? Isaiah comes to mind. Who will go for us? Oh, send me, send me. And a lot of you guys know that occurs. That God talks to his angels, and they are called little gods in English. They are called gods. It's the same Hebrew word Elohim, and it's a plural word. The I am is the plural in Hebrew, and it can either mean the one true God, Elohim, or the little gods, Elohim. There are 3 sessions in former teachings, I think it was last year, called God, Gods, and the Sons of God, that you could follow through if you're interested in finding out just how the mechanics of the divine counsel work and who's doing what, where, and why. So, a little bit more on the divine counsel. We'll just read Psalm 82. It'll really help you a lot. And this is in the ESV version. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods he holds judgment. Now here's God speaking. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Oh, good grief. Maybe you could translate Selah. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. God's telling his divine counsel just what to do. So here's either God or the psalmist talking. These guys, they have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. God's talking again. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die, and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations. So I want you to remember this one here. that I've highlighted. You are God's sons of the Most High. It equates them with the sons of God, with the gods, little g-o-d-s. And the reason I want you to look at that is because here in the next slide, counsel is at creation, shown by Job 38. And folks, these are the classical verses that we would point out. There's just many others that show that there is a counsel of God. And let me just show you this one. God is questioning Job about the beginning of all things, and because he answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, by the way, who is this that darkens counsels by words without knowledge, dress for action like a man? I will question you, and you make it known to me. In other words, answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know, O great one. Or who stretched the line upon it? These are all architectural terms, by the way. On what were its bases sunk, and who laid its cornerstone? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Now I picked the lovely angel picture up in the right-hand corner. Couldn't find any decent ones without wings and horns, and without dresses. But there they are, and they're looking kind of. I wasn't sure whether this was like the end of the world or the beginning of the world, so I picked it. You'll love it. You can take the horns off if you don't like it. But they were there at creation, and they were singing with joy. So, now, what this will bring to mind is the quintessential weird angel verses. And we'll read this one together. And we're moving toward the Corinthians context. We'll get there, but I have to give you this background. Genesis 6, many of you know this. If you don't know it, if you haven't spent time in Genesis 6, read it. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God, we know who those are, saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Oh, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. And some became mighty men, which are of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, or in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So, what do we learn from this in where I'm going with it? They're spiritual beings cohabiting with humans. Yes, you remember that there were giants in the days of David the king. His name was Goliath of Gath. There were hundreds more in Scripture. We can show them to you sometime. I've got a book that I'm working on called In the Footsteps of the Nephilim, which is the word for giants there in this verse. Show that to you in a bit. But and Nephilim they're all over the place in the word, and they were before the flood, they were after the flood. As I say here at the bottom, then there was a flood recorded in Genesis 6:6 to 8:22 that wiped out the earth, and everybody thought all the giants were gone. Nah, these angels didn't take no for an answer. But I want to show you a couple of other translations of this. Just so you have this, and it'll be on the video. I'm still going to publish a PDF of this, so you'll be able to thumb through it, print it out, and have it for your own books. Other paraphrases here. All of these I got from Bible Gateway. You can get them from your trusty, undusty computer program. I use BibleWorks. Verse 6, when the number of people started to increase throughout the fertile land, daughters were born to them. The divine beings saw how beautiful these women were, and so forth and so forth. In the days, giants lived on the earth. Common English Bible. More and more people were born until finally they spread all over the earth. Some of their daughters were so beautiful that supernatural beings came down and married the ones they wanted. That's actually quite close to the Hebrew, by the way. And then here, this translation calls them Nephilim. Goliath was one, as was Nimrod. Just a brief aside, I think I handle it in one of my other teachings. If I haven't, I will in the future. A very technical word, Nephilim, does not come from the Hebrew word nafal, which means to fall. These were not fallen angels. They're not even angels. They're the progeny of angels. But Nephilim does not mean to fall. It's from an Aramaic root that means giants. Hence the word giants in the Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Masoretic text. And again, that's a fairly technical discussion, which we won't get into tonight. But Nephilim are not fallen ones. Don't ever let anybody tell you they were. So, I want you to realize that this understanding of giants and, progeny from angelic and human relations is real. It was real all the way through the Hebrew Scriptures. It's real in the Christian Scriptures. Let's look at a couple verses just so you put them in your back pocket. And we'll show you how I do some research here. All these crosses and signs and arrows and highlights should help you. But let's look at 1 Peter 3, writing to the Jewish contingent. For Christ also hath once suffered for sin, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but being quickened by the Spirit, by which also the Spirit, how he was quickened into a living spirit, by which also he went and preached unto the, what's this? Spirits in prison. The heck is this? Which sometimes were disobedient when once the long-suffering of God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was preparing, wherein a few, that is 8 souls, were saved by water. These are the spirits, these sons of God, which we'll read in the next verse here. The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved into everlasting chains under darkness to the judgment of the great day. And then 2 Peter 2, 4, 5, and we'll get back to the discussion. For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, it's a different word for hell here than Hades or Gehenna. It's the word tartaro. It's actually the verb form of the word tartaros. He delivered them to hell, into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. So, the way we hook these all together, we got the days of Noah, gives you context in the 2 Peter sections. We got chains of darkness, which hooks those two together, and that helps us understand that the angels that sinned are the same as the angels which kept not their first estate, and which actually are spirits put into prison. He cast them down into prison. Tartaros was the lowest place of the Greek underworld. That's a whole other teaching that I don't have time to deal with tonight. But these spirits called angels here, called sons of God, which equate them all, sons of God in Genesis 6, left their first estate, or kept not their first estate. There were rules and regulations to the council, and God made them pretty explicit, and once someone disobeyed, there were consequences. The consequences in the case of the spirits who cohabited with the women on the earth at the time of Noah were they were cast into down to hell, and they're in chains of darkness. And Jesus went there and said, "Look, boys, I'm up from the dead. All your plans are for naught." And not only that, they will be dying like men. They will come to naught, as it says in 1 Corinthians. But there's a lot more to this that we won't get into tonight. I just want you to know that this understanding of the council, the understanding of Genesis 6, was not misunderstood until after the first century. The first century believers, Peter and Jude, certainly knew of this whole concept. And we'll go on from here. So, I'm using this presentation in part to begin a discussion about the word women, modern Western society. And it's a catchy title. But we in the first century church must come to grips, should come to grips with how the oft-maligned half-body of Christ, believing women, got to be maligned. We cannot continue to disempower by our misogynistic attitudes, whole cohorts of our battle group. And yes, it's an epic battle for truth, justice, and the godly way. I mean, John has said it over and over, and I totally abide in this understanding. We're at war. There's been a war since Genesis 1:1, after which the dragon did his dance on the earth and destroyed what was known as creation, and it continues through the Genesis 6 record where they're disobeying the rules God set up. Come down here, we got to throw them in prison. I mean, this is a battle, and we're in it. And the church, if you know Ephesians 3:10, it's our job to show God's wisdom to these jerks who keep disobeying. So we're in a battle. We don't need to lose half the army. And there's two verses we're going to keep in mind. I hope John's going to cover some more of these. These come to mind every time when you talk about women in the Word. Genesis 1:26. God said, let us, there's the counsel again, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let Adam rule over the fish of the... Of course not. It's let them rule over the fish of the sea and so forth. And this is also echoed in verse 28. God created them equal in the beginning, okay? And they screwed it up, not God. And if you understand, there's a section in Genesis that talks about after the sin and deception that occurred in Genesis with our forebears, the statement is that Adam will rule over his wife, and that was a consequence of sin, not a directive of God's original creation. This is the direction that God wanted it to go in, and it didn't. Let them rule God's creation. Well, we in the church today have to realize, after Jesus' passion and resurrection, ascension, and sending of the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost, that today, as Paul says in Galatians 3:28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, all are one in Christ Jesus. Okay? That's the deal. Jesus' sacrifice fixed it all. And John's going to teach a little bit more about that next week. So, let's get into the 1 Corinthians context, now that you've got a little bit of background from whence this teaching is going to dip back into some of this to explain a bunch of things. My acknowledgement here, which, 10 years ago, Troy Martin's paper became available. It's a context that I will give anyone who wants a copy of this paper a PDF form of it. You can just email me at the TLTF email that was given in the blast, and I'll send it to you. But I won't just send it to you without a little context. It's not easy stuff. It's scholarly stuff. You don't. If you don't know some Greek, it's going to be hard. Even if you know Greek, there's some scholarly jargon. They get on their highfalutin high horses, and you're just going to have to wade through it. But I will send it. I've given you my other address here. Probably shouldn't have. I should give you the other one. But Franco said he put a hyperlink on the blast, so you can email me. But I just want to know why you want it, if you want the paper. Because I don't want it just to... You're going to have to read it. And I want to know why you're going to read it. I just don't want to send these things. I don't want to waste my time sending things out to people who won't read it and won't understand it and engage in it. So don't just email me, say, I want that. I want this, I want that. So tell me why. But that being said, let's go. So, the head covering controversy. Is this what we're talking about? Are we going to have a little lacy gal here on the left with the church pews, and we're going to sit and we're going to make it... We have to have a little... They have to come to church this way. Hey, in some traditions it's all day. Or can we wear baseball caps, or does God care if we look like the lady on the right? And the verse, of course, is, for if the woman be not covered, let her be shorn. But if it be a shame for the woman to be shorn, let her be covered. So let's cover her. That's it. Thus saith the Lord. It's in 1 Corinthians It's the Christian scriptures, and we want to look good on Sunday, right? It's all about Sunday. Well, there's a very, very simple answer to this head covering enigma, and we're going to get into it. But I also want to bring into this discussion the long hair, short hair thing, because that's in 1 Corinthians 11 too. We're assuming that Charlize Theron and Chris Helmsley are Christians for this a little analogy here. Doth not nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it's a shame to him? Okay, and then later in short hair for women, that's not too cool in God's understanding here in 1 Corinthians, at least in English. So what are we going to do? I mean, Chris and Charlize aren't going to make it. And of course, the question comes up in logical people's mind, smart people's minds, is this the God we worship who cares about long hair, short hair? Is this, please. If that's the problem, what about this dude? Of course he had long hair. So and he was blue. Of course he was. And if those two guys, if Chris Helmsley can't make it, then this dude can't make it. And we know who he is, right? Halo Man. Of course he made it. And we're going to fix this. We're not going to let it just dangle. We're going to fix this thing for all you people that wondered. I had some gentleman write me today. His name slipped my mind. I think it's Richard. Said that Jehovah's Witnesses told him that, you have to wear this veil all the time. And here's the denominational practice today. Most mainline conservative, Reformed, and dispensational, think Baptist and Pentecostal, churches require women to have a veil or a head covering in public worship. Anabaptists, Amish, Mennonites advocate the wearing of head coverings for women at all times. And my wife just said when they reach puberty, and that's an important thing. It'll come into this teaching. And you've seen it if you've gone into Indiana and gone to buy popcorn out in the Shipshewana area, that you see the Mennonites and the Amish all with the head coverings, the women. So within the congregation in the Jehovah's Witnesses, the women may lead prayer, but only when no baptized man is available. How about that? They throw you a bone, ladies. But of course you have to wear a head covering. And let me just say this. The literature in the scholarly realm from the conservative, Reformed, and dispensational churches is so heavy-handed on this section of Scripture, it makes me sick. Usually the explanation is that it's the sign of submission of the quote-unquote wife to the husband in the divinely prescribed headship arrangement consistent with nature and church practice. Or, as I say, it's because of the angels, which nobody understands, but we will by the end of tonight. The heavy-handedness, it bothers me because it just cuts off their nose to spite their face. It cuts off the women from ministering. And as we will see, this context, 1 Corinthians 11, is talking about women and men who are prophesying in public. So there's so many things going on here. I want you to know that there's been a sea change in prevailing relationships of men and women in Christ. The relationship not available before Pentecost, before the Holy Spirit was given. This head covering section of Scripture is linked with a couple more. John's going to handle a couple of them next week, and I list them here. Oh boy. The promises given to women in Scripture are incredible, especially since Pentecost. We know about the heroes in Scripture from the Hebrew Scriptures, but that can't even begin to compare with what has been opened up since Pentecost. And as I say, 1 Corinthians 14, women supposedly are supposed to learn from their husbands at home. You'll understand why. Women in 2 Timothy 2 are supposedly can't teach or usurp authority over men. These are the horrible translational problems that infect the King James and other versions. And then in Titus, women are supposedly supposed to stay home and obey their husbands and take care of the, take care of the children. We call this a teaser. We're going to get into some of those, but not tonight. All right, and here's something else we're not going to get into tonight because I just don't have time. It's all through this context of 1 Corinthians 11. It's called the headship issue in the church. It's not going to be central. We'll be going through it. Suffice to say that we understand the headship as the beginning, origin, or starting point, not as the leader. Okay? The leader is how most people use the word head. Well, of course, the woman and the man is the leader of the woman. That's not how we understand it. There's a definition of kephale, which is consistent in the ancient world. I'm going to get into this some other night in detail. And many evangelicals use the headship context, both 1 Corinthians 11 and Ephesians 5, like a hammer. But I'm sorry, ladies, I can't handle that tonight. I promise to handle it in the future. Okay, and this I think I kind of went through this already. The last quote being here, we are being introduced to God's arrangement for working relationships within the divine human economy. This is otherwise known as God's order of headship, as God designated line of responsibility. That's how the church sees it today. This is an Anabaptist writer. I just didn't quote him because I wanted to show you how they wrap this up in jargon that makes your head spin, and then it just comes out of their mouths to screw things up. And this first verse here is not even in the arrangement that is said by this section in blue here, because it starts out with Christ, goes to the women, and ends up with God. And we'll handle that, but not tonight. So, the modern head covering movement. It's about wife's submission to her husband. That's not German, sorry about that. It is about women's respect toward God in the church proper. It's not about a lacy napkin worn on the head as direction. These folks are serious as concrete. Even the women who wear the head coverings in church they're just rabid. Go online, look up the head covering movement, how it's just your duty, women, to put napkins on your head. Well, whatever. It doesn't even say what you're supposed to put on your head, but they'll tell you how wrong you are. And they'll tell you that if you don't, you're a liberal person that doesn't understand God's Word, and that you just don't get it, and that you're not submissive to your husband. And of course, it's not something that the so-called enlightened Christians should ignore. Enlightened being those that actually think and don't think that God has issues with head coverings or long hair, short hair. Okay, so the questions come up. Was it a cultural thing among the Near Eastern population? Is it something that we, us poor moderns that think we're enlightened, we lost it since the Scriptures were? Is that the state of affairs? Did we lose it? Are we supposed to go back and put stuff on our heads when we're prophesying and praying? And will God be offended with women who do not wear head coverings in public worship? So those are legitimate questions. There's probably a bunch more that some of you have even heard that I don't even know of. But I want to show you something. The answer to the first one, is it part of the Near Eastern custom? I thought you'd be this is going to be a brief comedic aside that is the modern Muslim head covering a remnant of the biblical culture? The answer to that's probably yes, because they stayed in the biblical culture. There's reasons they did that. Most of it's because they want to put women under their thumb. But we're going to take a quick look at the modern Muslim head covering just because I want you to see how, silly it is. The Huffington Post Know Your Veils shows these 8 different sections. We're going to look at them real quick. They're going to be here if you want to stop the tape at some time, or if you want to have the PDF, you can have it. Here's how a modern Muslim tries to interpret the veil. Supposedly from biblical culture, right? Here's the hijab. And then there's the hijab in soccer. Okay, let's put this in Texas, Michael, and see how long they could wear that one. And here's the shalaya and the abaya on the runway. And this is supposed to bring us into the 21st century. Wear your veils, women, wear them well. And here's the niqab. And yeah, we just want to cover up everything except for the slits of the eyes. And I wouldn't drive with you if you paid. And then there's the batula. Let's get fancy. And then there's the burqa, okay? That's like, you can't even see their eyes. Now these are all, you can see they're all legitimate. They're in society. They're Muslims. I just wanted to show you this one, the chadar. My sister Susie Axtell used to wear this one when she was in Saudi Arabia back in the 80s. She and her husband Steve, they cover not only the head but the legs and the arms. She used to hate it, but she would have to, or she would get whacked on her legs by the, what were they called, honey? Mullah. The what? Mullah. No, mullahs? No, that's not it. Whatever, the religious guys. Maybe it was the mullahs. Yeah, mullahs. Okay, it was. You're right. She'd get whacked on her calves. Hated it. And then, of course, here's the really good one. If you're going to get married to a Muslim, let's get white. Let's get pretty. Let's get, dangerous with it. This is the 7th or 8th one. Then I thought I'd just live you a little there. Here's the modern Arab or Muslim at the beach. Baywatch has nothing to be ashamed of. And then the burkini. Just really? I mean, really. They are really locked into 2,000 years ago. And there's just no way to recover from that. Now, I said that I would take halftime right now. But, in fact, I don't think I've only gone for about 40 minutes. So, this might be a regular research night where I don't go past an hour and a half. So, I could take a break, but I think I won't. It's only been a half hour. You guys are okay, right? Right. So, let's go. We'll go into the context of 1 Corinthians 11. And this may go faster than I think it was. I think I was very nervous this week as I prepared. My wife will attest to that because this is just something I want you to understand badly. So let's read 1 Corinthians 11, 1 through 15. Be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. This is KJV. You'll see the italics. But you'll also see how really messed up the context is. Now I praise you, brethren, that you remember me in all things and keep the ordinances as I delivered them to you. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, the head of every woman is the man, the head of Christ is God. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. But every woman that prays and prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. For that is even all one as if she were shaven. What? Oh, anyway. For if a woman be not covered, let her be shorn. But if it's a shame for her to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, forasmuch as he's the image and the glory of God, but the woman is the glory of a man. For the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Neither was God created for the woman, or man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. For this cause ought the woman to have power on her head because of the angels. Nevertheless, neither is the man without the woman, neither is the woman without the man in the Lord. For as the woman is of the man, so even so is the woman also by the man also by the woman. Slow down, Bob. But all things are of God. That solves it. That solves it right there. All things are of God. No, it doesn't. Judge in yourselves, says Paul. Is it comely that a woman pray unto God uncovered? Doth not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him? Not to Chris Hemsley. But if a woman have long hair, or the Beatles, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given for her for a covering. But if any man seem to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither the churches of God. And now, I'm telling you right now, folks, the KJV is so bad, and I just wanted you to read it and how bad it is, because let's look at this. The context starts with traditions, not doctrine, verse 2. every man and every woman, verses 4 and 5. It doesn't seem to say husbands or wives, but so many preachers say that it is all about wives. The Greek words there for man and woman can be translated husband and wife, but it also, and most times, is translated man and woman. Chapter 11, prophesying women actually speak because they're prophesying and praying, verse 5, but should be covered, seems to contradict chapter 14, which John will handle, where it says, don't speak but ask your husband at home. I'm just showing you the convoluted chapter 11. If a woman isn't covered, verse 5, while speaking, let her hair be cut off, verse 6. And it doesn't jive with let her be covered, also in verse 6. Now, here's the good one. Women should have power, exousia, authority on her head, verse 10. What? And it's because of the angels? There's a double what. That's why this teaching is kind of a weird angel verse, and it allowed me to segue into the women thing. And then number 6, verse nature. Of course, Paul says nature shows you somehow that men should not have long hair, but women should. How we're going to get into that. Women's long hair somehow is her covering in verse 15, but she should be covered in verse 5 with something else. When? Why? How? Finally, if any man, or anyone, it really should be, wants to be contentious about the issue, verse 16, Paul says, we have no other custom, nor do the other churches of God. So does that mean a woman should or should not be covered? Lucy, you got some explaining to do, and yes, we will start. Verse 2. The first mess up here was translational. Now, I gave you 5 or 6. You can go on to Bible Gateway if you'd like to see about 30 or 40. The King James has the word ordinances here. Now I praise you, says Paul, brethren, that you remember me in all things and keep the ordinances as I delivered them to you. Now that means he did it in the past, okay? And if, as the King James has translated it here, ordinances, I mean, that makes you think of Hebrew Scripture stuff. You know, statutes, ordinances, commandments. I mean, they're set in stone. And by God, you're supposed to do them all. And this is the reason the Protestant Church since 1611 has ground this into the life and system of the churches. Here's NAUS, New American Standard. He translated the word ordinances traditions. That's blue, it's good. Traditions is the Greek word. It's the same thing as Jesus used in the Gospels, saying, you know, you've traded the traditions, you've taken the traditions as the word, and you stupid idiot Pharisees. We'll get into that. The NIV has the teachings. That's bad. I'm telling you, that's just the teachings. That means from the mouth of God, doesn't it? The New Jerusalem Bible, which by the way is one of my favorites. It's a Catholic version done by French scholars. I love this version. It's a paraphrase, but it's a great one. Congratulate you for remembering me so consistently, for maintaining the traditions exactly as I pass them on to you. And then, of course, the Young's Literal. Again, it's got the word deliverances instead of traditions or ordinances or teachings. What? It's terrible. I'm telling you, it's the word traditions, and we will see this. It's the word paradosis. As I said, it's the same word used in the Gospels, highlighted there, for when Jesus confronted the religious leaders and said, you know, you've traded out God's word for these traditions. Usually, folks, that means the Talmud, which is a general term for the Jewish traditions that were oral at the time, the Gemara and some of the other things. Really, the traditions are really traditions. Now, usually it's in a negative light, as all of those in parenthesis there, and there are a couple that are used by Paul for good. The one that we're reading here, in 2 Thessalonians 2:15 and 3:6, you can call these Christian traditions. But what was Paul happy about? Okay, what was he happy about? The Corinthians were pulled out of some pretty weird religious stuff, I'll tell you. And these traditions that Paul had previously delivered, he sees that the Corinthians are following them. Okay? Here's what the pagan traditions of the Corinthians had. They were a Roman colony. They had other gods. Covering of the men's head during public worship was the norm. We'll see this contradicts some of Paul's expectations, of course. Women devotees of Isis had long hair and curls to their shoulder. Some of the cult of Dionysus had unbound hair. Sometimes bareheaded women were depicted in worship too, and we'll get into that. Paul brings it up in his context. And note, I just wanted you to have these other two contexts here, Corinthians 10, 14, and 12, 2. If you go there, and we won't tonight, you'll see that Paul is reminding the Corinthians that they had a truly pagan past. And maybe John will handle some more of the Corinthian background next week. But it was bad. Corinth was at the crossroads of the trade routes to the east and to the south, into the Levant, into Palestine proper. It was a great city on the coast that, or near the coast, that, everybody went there to go to the east. And you had everything religious that you can even imagine. The Greco, I thought you should hear, I'm going to read you just a few things for a minute so you can sit back and listen. The Greco-Roman evidences regarding women practice in worship is very ununiform. Several representations, this would be in pottery and so forth, demonstrate the covering of the head is common for women engaged in religious sites. All right. Other representations also show them with uncovered heads. Let's see, Catherine and Richard Krieger, which couple wrote some great works on women's freedom in the church, say that disheveled hair and head thrown back were almost trademarks in Greek vase painting and other literary sources. The Maenads, which were the worshipping women, I believe, had this. The Bacchus, Dionysus women have a rallying point, it says here, for showing that they worshipped bareheaded, and this was somehow showing their freedom sexually. Both of the cult of Dionysus that I reference here on my slide, and the other cult of, it came out of Athens. They both were represented in Corinth in great detail. And the pre-Christian traditions, these were traditions that Paul was replacing with his tradition. I thought it was important that you understand that what they came out of was important to the explication of this context that we're getting into. So let's go back to the context of 1 Corinthians 11, 3 through 5. But I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. And again, verse 4, every man, I've tried to show you how this proceeds. Every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonors his head. Wait a minute. Do you see what's going on here? Paul's saying, if you cover your head, that's the pagan tradition I just told you about. But every woman that prays and prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head, for that is even all one as if she were shaven. Okay? So uncovering the man's head speaks against the former traditions that the Corinthians had. The Greek text does not say husband. And then underneath here, so covering up the woman, who by the way is speaking in church, what's it all about? And the text doesn't say wife. These slides are for your use to go back to later. So, okay, now verse 6 seems a bit wacky. For now, if the woman be not covered, let her also be shaved or shorn, presumably her head. But if it is a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered. Good Lord. apparently it's a huge deal for Paul and the believers, okay, especially at Corinth. The covering enters into the discussion even later, and it seems more confusing here, verse 15. But if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. So, what do we want from Paul? A covering or a woman's long hair for a covering? This will become clear as we proceed. Okay, here verses 7 through 9 are more headship issues, but since the word cover comes up, I want to read it. For a man indeed ought not cover his head, of course, because of the former pagan tradition of covering your head in worship to the pagan god, for as much as he is the image and glory of God. Seems proper. But the woman is the glory of the man, for the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. Neither was the man created for the woman, but the woman for the man. Please remind me to handle this scripture at a later time. But this change of traditions from the former religious practice of men having their own heads covered to Paul's is what is important. Okay? So now we finally get to the angel verse, right? 1 Corinthians 10, for this reason it is right for a woman to have, and here we go, we're going to go through this again, a sign of authority on her head. The Darby translation, to have authority on her head. ESV, a symbol of authority on her head. KJV, have power on her head. And NASB, symbol of authority on her head. The most trustworthy, I think, is NAUS, to have the symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. But is it the covering of the hair or the covering of lace? Or a football helmet? What the heck is it? We're not there yet, and you're just going to have to be patient. I know this is complicated. Verse 11 and 12. Nevertheless, neither is the man without the woman, neither is the woman without the man in the Lord. For as the woman is of the man, even so is the man also by the woman, but all things of God. So I just wanted to point out this red section sounds a bit like Galatians 3:28, but these verses speak to the origins, which speaks to the headship issue, which we're going to have to handle at a later time. But I just didn't want to miss these verses as we're going through. Verse 13, here we're starting to get to the meat of the matter. Look, you Corinthians, judge for yourselves. Is it comely that a woman pray unto God uncovered? All right. Is it evident to you in New York 2014? Is it evident to you, Michael, in Texas in 2014? Judge for yourselves. Should she be... You got nothing to judge on, okay? You got no standard. I don't care what the Arab and Muslim community shows you day after day and shoves in your face. There's no standard to judge yet. You don't know any standard. So, but we want to include the next couple verses. In the middle here, does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it dishonors him, but if a woman has long hair, it's her glory? For her hair is given to her for a covering. So let's get into this. Very competent scholars have an extremely hard time with this, but it's easy. The word here for nature is phusis. It's going to come up later. Remember it, ingrain it in your mind. The word here in the King James Version for, and this is what screwed up this verse for so long, is the word anti in the Greek. It's instead of. And the word for covering is parabolaion. Parabolaion. So what nature is Paul talking about here? And why, in the accurate translation, folks, is for her hair is given to her instead of a covering. Instead, put that in your Bibles, mark out whatever's there. Some of the translations have it right, but it's the word anti. It means instead of, in place of the parabolaion. And what the heck is a parabolaion? It's the only place here in this context where that word is used. The other words for covering are different. We'll get into that, covering or uncovering. It's the verb form of a different word. What are we talking about here? So, I just want to point out a little bit more how convoluted it is by quoting from one of the scholarly articles. We're in a position, even right now, that we're no longer able to decide which behavior Paul is criticizing, which custom he means to introduce. Traditionally, exegetes have conjectured that Paul was insisting that the spiritual women leaders wear the veil according to a Jewish custom. Folks, there is no Jewish quote-unquote custom. I don't care how many verses you get in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Scriptures. You'll find maybe the story of Rebekah in Genesis 24, but it's nothing set in stone. Yet verse 15 maintains that women have their hair instead of a parabolaion. Okay? And thus that militates against such the interpretation. It's a very convoluted argument which can no longer be unraveled completely. Paul adduces several points for this custom or hair fashion. That's where we are right now. Okay? But note here that this particular scholar, in one of the articles, which I will send to you if you request, notices that it's instead of a head covering, instead of the parabolaion, the women have their hair. So let's go on from here and see what we can see. And this is where I'm going to take a brief aside and let you think. This is a very exciting point in this teaching, in that some of you know about regular archaeology, where you dig and you find, texts, or you find a city that was never seen before. They call them tells in Israel, Syria, Jordan, generally Palestine. Covered up cities where they send students during the summer to dig up old cities, and occasionally you'll find text, which is fabulous. That's archaeology, and archaeology is fabulous. You get an unearthing of tremendous literature. Well, there's another type that is also engaged called word archaeology, at least that's what I call it, where you've got texts which have been written and help you define words that we get in 21st century that maybe we don't understand. This archaeology, you go back into these texts, and we're going to do a little bit of that tonight, from Hippocrates and Euripides, who wrote in the middle century of the former, in BC, like 500 BC. Here it is down below, 460 to 300 and 480 to 406 BC. Greek texts that really speak to this context that we're covering tonight. And I want to show you that because we're going to go into these texts, you have to have an understanding of ancient science. We call it proto-science. Things like leeches help with bloodletting. Sun revolves around the earth. Humors were in the body, and the earth is flat. The reason I'm bringing this up is because we're going to go into medical texts that will help facilitate the understanding of what Paul was talking about in nature. In nature, okay? And some of you have, in former research nights, know that it's important to understand that the Bible was written to unscientific people. There's many of these sections of scriptures that will be explicated by looking into the texts from whence Paul read, and even, his understanding of physiognomy, the physical nature of things. Let's go to see some more. You guys, I throw this little thing in here. You don't have to read it. This is the four humors. It was from Hippocratic medicine, but still continued on through the Middle Ages. And they didn't perform autopsies at all. So what kind of nature did they have at the time of Paul? They probably still had the humors. They probably had crazy stuff like this. I doubt it. This is from the 14th century. They tried to put the zodiac in through the body. But I throw these scriptures up here because the conception of the body was not the same in the first century Palestine. Okay? Here we go. Parabolaion always has to do with a garment. Verse 15. A woman, if she have long hair, a glory to her, because the hair, instead of a covering, has been given to her. This is not the same Greek word as covered and uncovered, which I promised to give you here, that are used in the context about it. It's used, these two other Greek words are used in the context in verses 4, twice in 6, 7, and 13. This word, parabolaion, is the word for covering here in this verse. All right, here we go. Hercules gets to come into this story. Euripides used this word in his relating of the Hercules story. Here it is. After I received my bags, they were a covering of flesh, which were the outward signs of puberty, I received labors about which I shall undertake to say what is necessary. Okay? A dynamic translation of that phrase would be, after I received my testicles at puberty. The covering is the bag in this context. Medical texts from the period show the following. The brain and the body is where semen is produced and stored. Hair is hollow, sucks up semen up and out, and hair is grown longer by the process. And the semen congeals in the hair. Less hair on the body makes the movement of semen through the body and from the male to the female for conception easier. Don't you love this? We'll slow down a little bit. Ancient medical conceptions confirm this association. Hippocratic doctors held that the hair is hollow, grows primarily from either the male or female reproductive fluid or semen flowing into it and congealing. Hair grows more prolifically from the head because the brain is the place where the semen is produced or at least stored. Hair grows only on the head of prepubescent humans because semen is stored in the brain, and then the channels of the body have not yet become large enough for reproductive fluid to travel throughout the body. At puberty, secondary hair growth in the pubic areas marks the movement of reproductive fluid from the brain to the rest of the body. Women have less body hair, not only because they have less semen, notice that they thought they had semen, but also because they have cooler bodies. And they don't froth the semen throughout their bodies, but reduce the semen evaporation at the ends of their hair. Folks, if you can see the footnotes here, this is all grounded in ancient texts that say this. I was considering putting them in here and showing them all to you, but I decided, let me just give you the basics here. According to these Hippocratic doctors, men have more hair because they have more semen, and their hotter bodies froth the semen more readily throughout their entire bodies. The nature, the phusi, the same Greek word, it's in transliteration, or it's in English transliteration here. It's the same word for nature that Paul used in 1 Corinthians. The nature of man is to release or eject semen. During intercourse, semen has to fill all the hollow hairs on its way to the male brain, from the male brain to the genital areas. Well, at least they got that part right, the ejaculation part. I guess they couldn't miss that. Thus, men have hair growth on their face, chest, and stomach. A man with hair on his back reverses the unusual position of intercourse. A man with long hair retains much or all of his semen. Okay? And the hollow hair draws the semen towards his head area, but away from his genital areas, where it should be ejected. Therefore, 1 Corinthians 11:14 correctly states that it is a shame for a man to have long hair, since the male nature is to eject rather than retain semen. Got that? All right, keep your hats on. Here we go to another one. According to this understanding, the masculine functional counterpart to long feminine hair is the testicle. Okay? The parabolaion. Aristotle calls the male testicles weights that keep the seminal channels taut between the head and the head and down there. Their function is to draw the semen downward, perform the final frothing that adds the additional heat necessary to transmit the form of the individual to the female reproductive menses. The female is not given such weights, but instead develops a hollow uterus and the appropriate vessels to draw semen upward. What might that be? Hair. That's another quote for you here. Thus, testicles do not drop at puberty for females as they do for males. This is the old understanding. But folks, this is the understanding when Paul was alive. Long feminine hair assists the uterus in drawing the semen, I'm going to say ejected from the male, upward and inward. Masculine testicles draw the semen downward and outward. Long hair is a glory for the female nature, but a shame for the male nature, as Paul correctly states in 1 Corinthians 11, 14, and 15. Okay, what about women at procreation? The body, oh jeez, my wife read this. She's gone through the scholarly articles and she read this, and I can't tell you how she laughed. This is their conception. The body of a woman is one big gland. The function was to absorb. The woman's long hair collects the excess fluid, and with suction power, the reproductive fluid from the male is drawn up by his hair, whereas the shorter hair allows the fluid to be drawn downward to the pubic areas where the man's hair is to be thick. Remember, semen is formed in the brain or the body. Woman's pubic hair is often cut or singed. It's often cut or singed, and pottery shows this. I have quotes here from people that show this, folks, and that's so as not to impede the flow of the fluid to the uterus, okay? And apparently the Brazilians had nothing on ancient women. Now, I have a note here to read you something else. You're going to have to bear with me. I want this on the tape. The conception of hair as part of female genitalia explains the favorite Hippocratic test for sterility in women. A doctor places a scented suppository in a woman's uterus and examines her mouth the next day to see if he can smell the scent of the suppository. If he smells the scent, he diagnoses her as fertile. Somehow there was a connection between the uterus and the mouth. If he does not smell the scent, he concludes she is sterile because the channels connecting her uterus to her head are blocked. The suction power of the hair cannot draw the semen up through the appropriate channels. So the male seed is therefore discharged rather than retained, and the woman cannot conceive. The conception of hair as part of the feminine genitalia also explains one of Sorianos' signs of conception. He states that immediately after coitus, the woman who conceives is conscious. Oh, I can't read this Greek word. Sorry. The explanation is that she feels the erection of the hair on her skin. The connection of conception with the physiological experience of a chill, often accompanied by the erection of hair on her skin, relates the hair to a woman's reproductive processes. This is how they looked at it, folks. All they saw was on the outside, no autopsy. So they formulated these theories of hair as, related to, the genitalia. Okay? So one Hippocratic doctor recommends that a woman neither bathe nor get her hair wet after coitus if she wants to retain the semen. Finally, the conception of hair probably explains the curious practice of women's singeing their pubic hairs. Aristophanes, and I won't quote him, he praises the lamp for singeing hair, the flowering hair. A vase painted even depicts a woman engaged in this activity, which was common for women and often inflicted upon their male adulterers. Singeing the pubic hairs seals the opening in the hair and destroys its power to draw reproductive fluid into the genital area. Thus, singed pubic hair enhances female fertility by not counteracting the suction power of the hair on her head. Okay, so now, translating parabolaion as testicle in 1 Corinthians clears up the problem of the so-called head covering. It's not a head covering. Her hair, long hair, is given to her instead of a testicle. Okay? The male counterpart in reproduction, at least in proto-scientific times. Her hair, as we have seen, functions as part of her genitalia, drawing up seminal fluid. So basically, here's the angel part. Paul is trying to protect his prophetic women from what? Angels who want to procreate. Think Genesis 6. It was just as real to Paul as when he wrote his epistle as it would be and should be for us today. Now, I'm not saying we have to think that hair is any longer part of your genitalia, women, okay? But I say we still have to understand that the angels still want to procreate, and that's why we are modest today by wearing clothes. And these matters are spiritual and should still not be taken lightly. Okay, here we go at the end. The last verse in the context. But if one is inclined to be contentious, we have no other practice, nor have the churches of God. Remember that this is in Corinth, where there was a lot of religiosity going, and these new traditions that Paul was giving to the Corinthian people are challenging all that they used to know about their gods. The former traditions, there's definitely possible reaction, so there could be contentions. There's records that I have read of women with flowing hair, maybe even the Lilith concepts of the Hebrews, that danced in front of the gods with their hair flowing, flaunting their sexuality, wanting intercourse with the angels, if you can imagine. Folks, this stuff in Genesis 6 shows up in all cultures. It's not Hebraic only. The Hebrews got it right. The prophets got it right, but the hair, long hair, even the shorn hair, we're still having to get into the shorn hair thing, where it was not a great thing to cut off your genitalia for women, right? You read that earlier in 1 Corinthians 11. It's not a great thing, but it could be shameful. But if you short it off, women, maybe you're making a point that you don't want to show it off to the gods. And so, but if it's a shame, just be covered. Does that clear up? Do you understand how that clears up the other stuff that we were reading? I think it does. And I'm going to read something else to you just to close out the understanding of this concept. Understanding the rationale for an uncovered woman's shaming her man, remember that in the context of the new traditions received to the Corinthians, this whole thing resolves the difficulty. Shaming her man in the context of the new traditions received by the Corinthians from Paul. Praying or prophesying, listen carefully, with uncovered head exposes part of the woman's genitalia. Such exposure, when engaged in God's service, is strictly forbidden by the new tradition advocated by Paul. Here are some scriptures for you. I may stick these into the PDF. They aren't here, but they're on the tape here. Isaiah 6:2. The Sepharim, who participated in the divine liturgy, have 6 wings. 2 are for flying, 2 cover for the face for reverence, 2 cover the feet for modesty. The term feet there is euphemistic. I can just tell you this from knowledge. It's euphemistic for the genitalia of the Sepharim, the seraphim for some of you. The priests in Yahweh's service receive special instructions for approaching the altar so that their nakedness is not exposed. Exodus 20:26, if you want to look it up. As a further precaution when entering the tent of meeting, approaching the altar, the priests wear linen breeches from the loins to the thighs and cover their naked flesh. That's Exodus 28, verse 42 through 43. Again, flesh is euphemistic for genitalia. And that's from Leviticus 15:2 and 19, Ezekiel 16:26, and 23, verse 20. The breeches that these priests wore are for the glory and beauty of the priest, as stated in Exodus 28:40. while the exposure of the genitals subjects the priest to guilt and death. Exodus 28:43. By this informed tradition, any women praying or prophesying with uncovered head would indeed shame her man as well as herself. So, this tradition that Paul delivered also correlates with the shame of the shaved woman, with an uncovered woman in God's service. This tradition, participants in the divine liturgy were prohibited from shaving their heads. Look at Ezekiel 44:20 for that. Or from having any bodily defect. Okay? A shaved woman is a castrated woman, in the sense that you understand testicle, okay? Similar to the eunuchs, and is prohibited from participating in the service of God. Deuteronomy 23:1, Leviticus 22:16 through 24. So in this tradition, therefore, an uncovered woman is one and the same from a liturgical point of view as a shaved woman. Get it? An uncovered woman with flowing hair, flaunting her genitalia, is just as bad as one shaving her head and not being able to you'd be shameful before God. So, of the two, so both are prohibited according to Paul, if we reread this section, from praying or prophesying. So of the two, 1 Corinthians 11:6, by the way, prefers that the woman with no genitalia to the woman who has her genitalia exposed. And so if you'll reread that section from verses 4 and 5, and why don't we just go back up there? Maybe I can work this through with you a little bit. Okay. Verse 4 and 5. Every man praying or prophesying having his head covered dishonors his head. We got that because they used to pray with their head coverings to the pagan gods. Every woman that prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head because she's got flowing hair and she's showing off her genitalia. For that is even as one if she were shaven. Verse 6. For a woman, if a woman be not covered, let her be shorn. Okay? Shaved, presumably. But if it be a shame for a woman to be shorn, it is, let her be covered. Okay? And as we saw later, her hair is given to her instead of a testicle, because of what we saw regarding this quote from Euripides, Hercules having his testicles, his bags of flesh, the outward signs of puberty, which he received before his labors. So folks, from ancient medical conceptions, which Paul was considering as nature, does not even, let's go back up here, does not even nature tell you that that it's, it's good that if a man has short hair. Nature, what nature? That which has to do with the procreation process. But if a woman has long hair, it's gloriful. But her hair is given to her instead of the parabolain, the testicle. So cover it up. So I'm telling you, it's a convoluted English thing without knowing what nature Paul is talking about. And now we know what nature Paul is talking about. And yes, the ancient readers of his epistle could judge for themselves because of the sexual nature of exposed long hair and men having long hair retaining the semen up there when it should be down there in the testicles so that they can have kids. Judge for yourselves. Is it comely that a woman pray to God uncovered? No, it wasn't at that time. It's obvious. Nature tells us it's obvious. They're sexual organs. Cover them up, girls. Okay, folks? Not in the 21st century today. Not in the 21st century today. So, there it is. It's not a Muslim tradition that we should follow. It's not, a tradition of covering. You don't need to cover anything. You can have that long hair if you're a man or a female because you got no semen up there. It's where it's supposed to be, in the testicles. And I'm glad we've straightened it out. Now, here, last screen, I've given you some books that I think, as we move forward in the study of women in the Bible, that you will enjoy. Some of you may not know these books. John will give you some more, I think, on next Wednesday. And my wife and I feel that these are really, really important ones. Why Not Women? A Biblical Study in Missions, Ministry, and Leadership by Lauren Cunningham. I Suffer Not a Woman from the great Catherine and Richard Clark Krieger. John, I don't know whether this is the 500-page book or the 300-page book, but there it is. Another great one, 10 Lies the Church Tells Women by J. Lee Grady. And one that I have a PDF copy of, I commend to I commend to you, our sister. Sorry, I got an R there. I have a PDF copy of that available. Folks, it's 600 pages long and it's full of Greek. I will give that one to somebody who really will read it. But these other two articles from which much of my teaching was taken, I'll give you these. They're hard. They're very difficult. You could see that I was throwing in there a lot of Euripides. And some of these other highfalutin Greeks. So I put these up here. If you want the copies to read through them, I'll give them to you. Maybe it'll make it clear, or maybe it'll confuse you, but I know if you re-listen to this, you'll understand a little bit more about this very difficult section of Scripture that should be a little bit clearer for you women. Don't wear any veils. Don't worry about it. Teach all those misogynistic people in church that keep telling you you're just lower than dirt to read these articles from a good scholar, and they'll understand it. So, ladies, I promise that I will cover the headship issue at a later date, because that's another one that just kicks you in the teeth so often, puts you under the thumb of some unsuspecting man that reads the English versions, and it needs to be fixed. But I'm very grateful that so many of you showed up to this research night. Not many of them are quite this complicated. And I encourage you to go back into the research archive and get caught up on the God, Sons of God. Throw in a little bit of ancient Near Eastern mindset that handles the creation records even better. And I'm very glad all of you showed up. Well, I've got nothing else for tonight, and I look forward to your questions, and be happy to send you the stuff I promised to, if you'll give me a good reason why. And that way we can have a dialogue, not just an email back and forth, and you can get engaged in these research sessions and we can clear up stuff. And just to end this stuff is not to flaunt research. It's to straighten out sections of the Scripture that may have been clear as mud before. And it gets right believing. We understand why Paul did the traditions and so forth, but it gets us in the mode of right believing so that we can help people. Some of these things like the head covering issue, OMG, that people have suffered under that. And the headship and the long hair, short hair, how could God care about that? He doesn't. Not anymore. So thanks for showing up, you guys, and look forward to next month, and we'll keep you all informed, okay?